Welcome to the SOB radio show, where we have fun, interesting guests, and hot topics. Each week, we offer insights into music, fashion, health, fitness, and humor. Do you have the perfect guest for us to interview? I want to know. Drop me a line on our Facebook page at SpunkyOldBroad1 or reach out to me on our website at spunkyoldbroad.com. And now, back to the show.
You know, it's always nice to be able to interview someone that you've known for a very long time. And my guest today is JoAnna Brandi. And I've known JoAnna for quite a while. She's been in business since 1990, and she's a public speaker, workshop leader, and positive leadership coach. She's the author of 2 books on customer happiness and a beautiful gift book called 54 Ways to Stay Positive in a Changing, Challenging, and Sometimes Negative World. She's a certified chief happiness officer, as well as a happiness coach, trained by the father of positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman. She works to create positive workplace cultures and makes the world a happier place. Well, welcome, JoAnna, and that is certainly something we all need.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gayle. Yes, it is, isn't it? Especially these days.
That's absolutely the truth. So, you know, I know you as a speaker and author, so spend a few minutes telling us about what you actually do and what gifts you offer the world through your work.
Well, I go inside a company and see what's needed to do. So it's always a challenge when someone says, exactly what do you do? Every job seems to me to be very different. Sometimes I go in and speak, as you do, and very often I get the opportunity to help people work on their cultures, because as companies grow, cultures change. So you've got an owner, they start a company, the first 10 people, they understand the culture, they understand it absolutely. You know, everything is just the way the owner wants it to be. Excuse me. But as that company grows, the culture begins to change. And if there's somebody that's not minding the culture, very often you have pockets in the company that are not living the values. And in many cases, I find that people don't even have their values written down. So I do things like help companies craft a set of values for their culture, or refresh them if they've just gone through several acquisitions or they've grown very quickly. I help them work on their values. I help them understand how to live those values. Of course, I speak. I do workshops on positive leadership, and I even work directly with customer care people to help them.
But where does happiness come in, JoAnna?
Well, the happiness is the way I do it. The science of happiness is the way I do it. I use the evidence-based practice.
Give us an example of what that looks like.
An example of what that looks like would be to look at how the company's culture is running, as far as, is their communication positive? Is there meaning? Do they have positive meaning? So I think the word happiness actually throws me and everybody else off, in the sense that my designations use the word happiness, but in reality, what we're really looking for is positivity. Are we creating a positive workplace culture?
Well, I'm all about that. You know that, so that speaks to me a little bit more. But I know you know that I'm known as the SOB, the spunky old broad.
I know.
And I know you yourself want to be considered spunky. So tell us a little bit about what makes you spunky.
I'm the child of my parents were immigrants, and they were determined to find their way in this world. They were children of immigrants, and they were determined to find their way in this world, and I was the oldest. And so, as you can imagine, I had a lot of responsibility, and both my parents were lawyers, and they were in business together. And they gave me a lot of responsibility from the time I was very little. So I developed a bit of an attitude around it, because it was, I guess it's what I was being brought up to be. My mother was spunky. They were spunky in the way they thought about things. It
was spunky to be able to be in business together and in a law firm together. That's kind of a challenge as well.
Oh boy, was it ever.
So
yeah, they were in business together for 35 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell us, what would be the spunkiest thing that you ever did, JoAnna?
Yeah, the spunkiest thing that I ever did was quit my job.
Really? So what were you doing?
Yeah,
that you quit?
I was doing something very different than I'm doing now. I was heading up a division of a publishing company in New York, a technology publishing company, and I was the head of their direct marketing services division. And the culture began to change in that company, and I no longer felt that I fit. I brought them millions of dollars, multi-million dollar division, so I brought them millions of dollars, had a wonderful, wonderful staff. And for most of the time I was there, I just adored being in that field and doing what I did. But as the culture began to change in that company and my boss changed, I just decided one day that I was going to leave.
It took a lot of guts, I know. And this was in New York.
And I was making a lot of money. I was very comfortable, and my customers knew me well, and I did these big events. And the most fun part of the job is that I was responsible for doing these big parties and events in the 80s, and so there were lots of fun parts, and I was very attached to my staff. But I got my back up one day, and I won't tell you the incident, but it was an incident with one of my publishers that just threw me over the edge. I said, this is not fulfilling. It was not fulfilling to my soul anymore. And so I decided to leave. And I think what was spunky about it is I really left without any kind of a concrete plan.
They didn't give you a golden parachute?
You know what? I'll tell you what, that's the chance I took, because the company was run by a co-CEOs, the parents of the new leadership. And anybody else that had left that company in good standing was basically given business. They called me an entrepreneur. So it kind of was natural for me to want to be an entrepreneur. And anybody else prior to the boys taking over had been offered probably about a year's worth of business to make sure they got started well. But they had ceded their decision-making to their kids. And so I took that chance. I really took that chance, and I lost.
Wow.
They did not give me a golden parachute.
Wow.
Yeah. I knew I had enough money in the bank for a year. And so I didn't jump until I was pretty sure. What I used to do, if I may use I'm not going to say the word, but I had been tucking money away into what I called an FU account. Because I never wanted to be in a position where I wasn't able to feel free. And when I looked at when I actually went home that day, because I didn't even know how much money was in the account. I was just putting money in there, out of my paycheck. And I went home that day after this altercation, which had to do with the customer. And, I'm passionate about customers. I went home and I looked to see how much money was in the account, and I figured it out. I said, well, I can last for about a year. Now,
well, that's pretty good. JoAnna, that's pretty good. A lot of people don't have a year savings, so that's wonderful.
Exactly. And I did something that was kind of, the reason I changed my field is because I did something that was kind of strange. I now understand this to be an exercise in positive psychology. Now, this is almost 30 years ago. I called my customers up and said, look, I'm really getting to the point where I want to move on from this company, but I actually don't know what I do really well. I don't know what I do best. So you tell me, what do I do best? And almost every one of them said, you take better care of your customers than anybody else in the whole industry. Why don't you figure out a way to teach that? Well,
wow, that's quite interesting, because, a lot of people don't even think about doing something like that, asking your customer. And I say that myself. I say, if you really want to know what your unique feature is, go to your best friends, go to the people who know you well, and say, what's unique about me? What's unusual about me? What do I do extremely well? What would people come to me for? And that's exactly what you did.
That's exactly what I did, not knowing what I was doing. Now I do what you do. I do the same thing. And I do it. I don't know if you continue to do it. About every 4 or 5 years, I go out there, because I've met new people. I go out there and I ask the same question, because I don't really know on a day-to-day basis, did I do that really well? Did I not do that really well? I love getting the feedback. And it turns out when one of my clients, who got so fired up by positive psychology and positive leadership that she went to take a master's program in it at one of the universities, that was the first exercise that she had to do. And so she sent me a letter and said, when you see me at my best, what do you see me doing? The same kind of that they have a format for doing it. But that's actually the very first exercise you get to do when you go to take a master's.
So let me ask you, this is a show for women 50 plus. So what are you doing to continue living your life in a spunky way? And what do you say to the people that are listening that are saying, wow, it's over for me?
Well, what I say to them is that I get you. I understand what that means because it's been over for me a lot of times.
Really? Now tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, my business has not been a straight up. It's been what I would call an oscillating pattern. I have really, really, really good years, get really, really, really good clients, and then as is often the case in corporate America, somebody 2 levels up from the person that I'm working with changes their job, and a new person comes in, and they bring with them all new people. And I've had that happen. I've had that happen a few times. So I can go from making, lots of great money and having, wonderful work with people. See, I fall in love with people. That's the challenge. So I fall in love with these customers, and I'm working with them, and I'm part of their success, and I want to be part of their success. And then, in some cases, almost overnight, they go away. So when people, I guess, make their own impressions, have their own impressions of, well, you must have had a steadily successful career. That's not true. So what I do is I reinvent myself. After I get over it, and it takes me a fair amount of time to get over it, I find another way to reinvent myself. So I find a way to do I do a course that I've never done before. I study constantly, and I think that's the thing about being over 50 that I would love people to understand is that the most important thing is to find out what inspires you.
Well, that's true. That's very true. And I think, you know that I'm for continuous learning, and that I'm always taking courses and going to seminars and webinars and conferences and things like that.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, but it is tough when you work so hard to keep a client and you work hard to do things for that client, and then circumstances beyond your control, even beyond the client's control, forces you out. It does give you a kind of a a horrible feeling. So if I were to ask you for 3 pieces of advice for our listeners, what would those be?
Well, the first one I would give them is that I think we need to I think we want to be resilient. We want to be resilient and we want to be gritty. But I think that resilience can be highly overrated. I identified myself with my resilience. So rather than at the times when my company went into the hole and I went into the dip, rather than getting help, rather than asking for help, I plowed my way through it because my immigrant background said you just shoulder your way through it. And I would reinvent myself. I would, try to use all the positive self-talk possible. But sometimes I would not deal with the grief. And I think this is a big issue as we get older, is that energy builds up in our body. And all the things that you have not dealt with because you were too busy raising your kids or building your business or doing your job actually comes back to haunt you in the way of some physical ailment. So I think we have to pay attention to the fact, are we being truly resilient, or are we stuffing our feelings and letting them foment down there or somewhere in our bodies, which eventually causes something to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. You feel like you're soldiering through, but resiliency is well regarded. So that's one of the reasons why you really, I understand where you're coming from. So that's number 1, being resilient, but giving that up a little and showing a little bit of maybe softness there where you need to be. What's number 2?
Well, number 2 would be in line with that, is feel your feelings. Give yourself the opportunity to actually feel the feelings. If you're feeling grief, feel grief. Go into grief. If you're feeling angry, be angry for a short period of time. Swamp about, stomp your feet, shake your body, make a noise, get it out of your body, and then
That's interesting that you say that, JoAnna, because I have to tell you, I am not really great at grief. I don't experience grief a lot. I do get angry, although I've learned now to not be angry as much and to forgive, because if you don't forgive, you've got a problem. But I think that the grief part is something I do not process well because I just don't, I don't know, I don't go there. So let's go to number 3 and see how I do there.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. And maybe you do in a subtler way. Maybe it's not in maybe it's not in your bloodline. To, you know, I think so much of this comes from our ancestry.
Well,
I have.
that's probably very true. And I was brought up very lovingly, but strict, with a lot of discipline, and told, you just handle what's given to you. And all my life, that's what I've done. And I mean, there's been good, there's been bad, there's been wonderful, there's been not so wonderful, but you just carry on. And so, I mean, do I grieve when, like my mother used to say to me, because I'm a big animal person, and she said, I hope you cry for me as much as you cry for your animals, because, because I mean, but I just, I don't know if I talk to myself and I get myself out of it, but I know that that's been a difficult thing. So number 3 would be what?
Well, number 3, you already said, learn forgiveness.
Yeah,
Really
I've done
embrace
really well with
forgiveness.
that. I've really done
Yeah.
well with that.
Well, and I when I teach it in some of the workshops that I do are more personally oriented than business oriented, especially, although I do teach this in business, it really is that forgiveness is for giving you peace. But some people hang on to a grudge for a very long period of time, and it's eating them up inside. What do they say? Carrying resentment is like taking poison and expecting somebody else to die.
Well, that's true. That's very, very true. And I have a question, though. You mentioned this happened, I think, a couple of times, not only with your original job that you left, but then your clients. Why is it that when a business grows, much of the time it loses its culture, let's say its original culture,
Right.
and why, as it grows, do the managing partners, leaders, bosses, also change the dynamics so that, people are not responding the way they should, either working there or who are customers?
Those are two big questions. Why the culture changes uh, is usually because nobody's in charge of minding it.
But isn't that what the leader's job is?
Well, you'd be hard pressed to find a company that has somebody. Southwest Airlines always had someone that was in charge of the company. Yeah, I believe it is the leader's job. Positive climate, positive culture is the most important part of the job. But as a company grows, there are more things to manage. All of a sudden you need a CFO. All of a sudden you need new computer equipment. All of a sudden you need to move into a larger building. I mean, I saw it happen in the company I worked for, because when I started working, there were 90 people, and when I left there 12 years later, there were 1,800 people.
Wow, big change.
So I
Yeah.
watched us outgrow buildings and outgrow this. And as you outgrow, sometimes it's the physical environment. When we went from a smaller building where everyone could see everybody and everybody talked to everybody to a larger building that insisted, because of fire regulations, that there be walls.
Right.
We went from having that community in the middle where everybody talked to everybody else, so everybody knew what was going on, to really having to have meetings and things like that, which we were not used to. And I think that when culture really, and everybody says culture matters, but when everybody says culture matters, culture is discussed. It's talked about at meetings. And I like to think about it, if you look at a tree, there's a report I did years ago, it was called The Roots and Fruits. And if you look at the tree, all of the gorgeous, big, shiny red apples are at the top of the tree. Well, you don't get that unless the stuff underneath the ground is working. The root system, and that's the culture. Those are the values. And as a company grows, I just find it really rare. The Container Store had a wonderful woman by the name of Barbara. I can't remember her last name. Her title was Keeper of the Culture.
Wow, that's great.
And I think now more and more people are beginning to understand because we're at full employment, because they're losing good people, people are really beginning to understand that culture has to be worked into everything. But I'll tell you, it's still being considered a soft thing.
Which is a shame. It's a shame because, I mean, that's what really makes a statement. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Southwest Airlines, and I was reading something this morning, and someone was bragging on JetBlue and saying how other carriers, like American and United, don't care. They only want to make money, but JetBlue is friendly and happy and thinks about your culture all the time. But so, as you look forward in your life, where you are now, what you've been through, where do you see yourself?
Superwoman? A cape? I don't know. I see myself because of I'm very much like you are with studying. I'm always studying something. So I see myself really beginning to master some of these topics that I've been studying. Whether that is, going more deeply into the science of happiness. I study a lot of self-development work. And I see myself changing my story, changing how I think about life. I see it happening on a daily basis because I've built into my life a number of practices that I do on a daily basis, or at least attempt to do on a daily basis, that's changing me. So I see myself more joyous. I see myself in a deeper state of trust than I've ever been able to have before. I grew up in
that's really wonderful, JoAnna, because I think when you talked about reinvention before, and I'm all about reinventing, and I hear what you're saying, and the fact that you're open to the fact that what you're doing today may not be what you're doing in a year from now, or how you're living your life now may not be how you're living your life in 3 years, is very important. And a lot of people are afraid of that, especially women who are over 50, and especially women who may be alone after 50, if they're widowed or divorced, or in a situation where they don't have anybody else in their life. This is a very big challenge to them.
Well, and it was a very big challenge to me. Here's a true confession. Confessions of a happiness coach. Because I didn't deal with many of the things as they happened, and there were many things, in all areas, in business, and a lot of things in my personal life, because I didn't give it the time they needed, and because I was a single parent, and because I am single, and so fiercely independent, I was that way until my body gave out, until my body completely collapsed.
Wow.
And so it was triggered. Apparently, I have PTSD, which I did not know. It was triggered by the suicide of a friend. And I went down and didn't know why. And then I started getting sick. And then eventually, I was pretty much down for the count. I guess it would be called total burnout. And in the coming back and in the dealing with it, I've had to change the way I think about things. So I was afraid. I was afraid that things would change. I was afraid that I'd be alone my whole life. I was afraid that the business wouldn't bounce back. But it's such a gift sometimes when you fall apart. It's such a gift sometimes because then you have to ask for help.
Well, I mean, that's what it's all about. And the factor that, that happened and that you were aware of it. And it's almost like what Arianna Huffington was talking about when she talked about she wasn't getting enough sleep and she had to do this and she was concentrating too much on her publishing company and so forth and so on. Well, it's something that we really have to be aware of and we have to think about. And, we're people who are strong don't like to admit where they're weak. And so
you bet, especially in public.
Exactly. So
I know.
The fact that you've been able to bounce back and the fact that you've been able to do what you've done and you're continuing to do is very, very important. So, when we talk about these things, we're going to take a break in about less than a minute. So our listeners, please stay with us because JoAnna is really a talented woman who has a lot of things that she can offer to you, not only in advice and a gift and so forth, but just how she is and how she conducts her life. So stick with us, JoAnna, hang in there. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Terrific. Thank you.